In this second step, we're going to work with gathering the data and cleaning it up. The data can be available in a spreadsheet like we have it here. In other cases, we can pull it from a database like SQL or MongoDB. Sometimes we can web scrape the data, and in some cases, the data might not be available, and we can use proxies or informed estimations. The data can be static, meaning that it just doesn't change through time. Whatever we have is what we're going to use. Or it can be constantly refreshed, like on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis, and every time we refresh, the data changes slightly. It's important that we familiarize ourselves with the data and clean it up, and this process usually consumes a significant amount of time. It's important to get this right because the quality of the analysis depends on the quality of our data. As a reminder, here's the list of data that we need to build our dashboard. This is the data that we're going to be utilizing to create the dashboard. The link to this data is in the description below. And what you can notice is that this appears as a view-only mode. This means that if you try to type something in a cell, nothing happens, and there's limited functionalities that we can utilize. Given that this is the original copy, we do not want to modify that. So what you want to do instead is you want to go to File and make a copy. And you can find a place on your drive, you can give it a name, and you can make your own copy, and this copy you will be able to edit as you want. So for example, I can change this title and I can edit it correctly, and I have all the functionalities that come with Google Sheets. So what we're going to do now is we're going to clean the data. This process usually takes the most amount of time, but let's go one by one and first understand what we have in our data. So we have several columns from A all the way to column J. So the first column is sale type, and every row is a different property that we have. So we have the sold date, which is the date when the property was sold. We have the property type, which indicates if it's a condominium, a single family, if it's a multifamily, and so on. We have the state where the property was sold. We have the number of bedrooms and bathrooms and the square footage of the property. We have the sales price, the year built, and then you can see this is the URL that we grabbed from Redfin that shows the link to the information of the property. So what we're going to do next is we're going to make a copy of this sheet. This way we're going to work on this duplicate instead of the original. That way, if we mess up this copy, we can always go back to the original and restart again without having to pull the data all the way from scratch. Now, we're working with the assumption that the data that we're going to use is what we have here on the spreadsheet. However, this data could be pulled out from a SQL database, or it could be pulled out from the web or some other source. And depending on whether that data is being constantly refreshed or not, there's several variations of what we need to do when we work with this data. The first thing I want to do is I want to clip this URL. You can see that it goes way beyond the column. And what we want to do is we want to basically select this and clip it. That way we have all these columns here that we can observe more clearly. The next thing we want to do is we want to know how many properties we have. So one way we can do that is we can select a column and we can see at the bottom that it has 1,101 properties. Notice that the first row is the header. So basically this says that we have 1,100 properties. Another way is we can use the count A function and we can select any of these columns. I'm going to do something which is select from column J2. So basically row 2 all the way up to J, which means this is all the way down to the last row that appears in that column. And this counts that we have in effect 1,100 properties. So let's analyze our first column. In our first column, it says sale type. And what I see is that everything says past sale. I'm not sure if everything actually is past sale or they might have other values. So to double check that, I'm going to use a function called unique. And I'm going to select everything from column A2 all the way up to the bottom. And what this says is that all the unique values is just past sale. In other words, that column is not giving us any information except just saying the same thing row after row. So this is a column that is not very helpful for our analysis. And what we're going to do is we're going to hide it. So I'm going to click on Command Option 0. I have a Mac. Or you can hit here to the right and you can say I want to hide the column. So the column is now hidden back here. The next column we want to analyze is the sold date. Now what we want to extract for our dashboard is the year of sale. But when we look at this, we notice a few things. We have some dates that are formatted like this, September 13, 2021. We have other dates that are formatted in this fashion, which is 4/14/2022. And we have some dates that are just numbers. The reality is underneath the hood, the dates are numbers. And we want to fix this so everything is consistent. So let's add a column here on the left. And the first thing I want to do is I want to test if everything is a date. So I'm going to select all the values and I'm going to copy them all the way down. And you can already see we have true for several of these and we have false for some of these, like these numbers. And what I'm going to add here is an AND function, and I'm going to select everything on the column on the bottom. Now what this AND does is that if every value in the column is true, the output is going to be true. However, if one or more values are false, the output is going to be false. So obviously this is false because we have a few false values here. So let's fix that. I'm going to select column B and I'm going to change the format. I'm going to specify the number and I have this date format that appears here. Notice that there's options to customize the date and time in other formats that you might find more appealing. But in this case, we're just going to select this. Now we can notice that now all the date formats appear in number for month, number for day, and the year, and all look the same. And we no longer have these random numbers that we had seen before. And the AND is now true, indicating that all the values are true. If, for example, one of these cells becomes false, this AND becomes false. So this was a helper column that was allowing us just to validate if we had any other issues with our sold date column. This column C, we don't need it anymore. But what we do need to do is extract the year from the sold date. We're going to create a column that has the year. So we're going to select the year here. And we're going to copy this all the way down and we can validate for a few of these. So this is 2021 that we see here, 2022 that we see here, we have 2023 and so on. So we want to check for a few of these just to make sure that things are working as we expect. And finally, we're going to add a title called sold year. And I'm going to add this value of clean here at the end, just so we know that this is a column that we have created and cleaned up as opposed to a column that came raw from the original file. The next column we want to analyze is this column called property type. And it has information of whether the property is a condo, single family, and so on. So the first thing we want to do is we want to see how many unique values we have in that column. So we're going to use the function unique. We're going to select everything in that column, so from D2 to D. And basically we can see we have condo, we have single family, multifamily from 2 to 4 units, multifamily from 5+ units, townhouse, mobile. We have unknown and other. What's interesting is to see the unknown. I'm not quite sure why we have that. So what we're going to do is we're going to select our table and we're going to go to data and create a filter. And with the filter, we're going to go into this property type and we're going to filter to see how many unknown properties we have. And we can see we only have one unknown property and here's the URL. So let's click on it and try to understand what it says. So when we go here, we can look for something called style. And here down at the bottom, it says that the style is unknown. So it's pulling this information that says that it does not know what the property type is. However, when we look at the image itself, I'm going to guess that this is a townhouse. So I'm going to use that information and replace this unknown with the value of townhouse. Now it's very important that when you see things like this, you can either manually fix them or you can go back to the data engineers and ask, why does that data look that way? Maybe it was not included correctly or things like that. So you always want to explore and be skeptical of your data. So let's go back and see all the properties. And we can see now that unknown does not appear here in our unique values. Now this column we're not actually going to use in our dashboard, but we're going to leave it there in case we want to play with it later on. The next column we want to analyze is this column of state or province. So again, let's look at what are the unique values that we have in that column. And what we can see, we're going to go from E2 all the way to the bottom, is that we have Massachusetts, Washington, California, Louisiana, Florida, but then we have Washington spelled differently, Florida spelled differently than what we had before, Mass and Massachusetts, etc. So let me do something so we can see this better. I'm going to add a sort function outside of the unique function, so our data is sorted from smallest to largest. Now what we can see here is the first one that shows up is this MA, and notice that we have two other MAs here. What's happening here is that if I look at the length of those words, basically how many characters we have, we notice that the first one has 3 characters. The reason for that is we have a white space at the beginning. Similarly, this MA here probably has a white space at the end, and that's why they look different than this MA over here that has only 2 characters. So let's fix for that. Now, there are 2 ways we can do this. One way is we can select this column, we can go into data, and we can go into data cleanup and trim white spaces. When we do that, it says that 5 of the cells are going to remove the white spaces. And when we do that, we notice that now we have 1 MA. Basically, it removed the white spaces at the beginning and at the end. Now, this works, but there's a problem with it, is that if later we pull the data from a database, and again, MA with a space comes in, now we have to manually do that process again because it doesn't happen automatically for us. So I'm going to undo this, and I'm going to show a second way of doing it, which is I'm going to add a column here on the right, and I'm going to use a function called trim. And what trim does is that it removes the white spaces at the beginning and at the end, and we're going to copy this all the way down. So as a reference, I'm going to go again all the way over here to the side, and we're also going to do this unique for that specific column that we've just created. So we're going to go from here, F2, all the way to the bottom, and when we see that MA only appears 1 time. And if we go back here and we add MA with many spaces, notice that this added a period here, it appears here in this case with the MA of 5 characters, but here it is clean. So it doesn't matter if we pull new data in, it's going to be cleaner in this process compared to the previous process we just demonstrated. So let me undo that. So now we have this MA as it came originally, and we have this new column. I'm going to call it temp state for now. It's just an interim state. And what we see is now we have narrowed down from all these unique values to a smaller data set, but we're still having some problems. So I'm going to remove these 2 columns here. We don't need them anymore. And I'm going to add again the sort at the beginning of this unique so we can appreciate this a little bit more carefully. So what I want to do next is I want to create a lookup table that is going to look for all these values and return some values I'm going to create here. So CA, I want to return CA. California is also going to be CA. Florida is FL. Louisiana is going to be LA. Massachusetts is going to be MA for all its variations, and Washington is going to be WA. Now I'm going to add some column titles here of state lookup and state return. So the way this is going to work is I'm going to add another column here on the right. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do an X lookup, and I'm going to select this value of MA. And I want this function to look at MA in this column that I have here. I'm actually going to go all the way to the bottom and make it an absolute reference. The reason for that is maybe in the future I have other states that I want to add to the list, and I want to make it an absolute reference so I can drag this down and not lose the reference point. And the same thing is going to apply to the return. I'm going to start here. I'm going to go all the way down. I'm going to make this an absolute reference. And when I do that, I can copy this all the way down. And let's look at the unique values that I get here. So if I do unique of this column from G2 all the way to the bottom, I get only these 5 states. So we have cleaned up all the states to only appear in these 5 versions of how we write the states: MA, WA, CA, LA, and FL. We're gonna add a title now to this. We're gonna call it state clean. And this is what we're gonna use. Now, there is a limitation to this process. I'm gonna explain the limitation, but I will not address it in this tutorial. If in the future we have a new state like Texas, and I type in TX, you're gonna notice that Texas now appears here. Texas, the way we wrote it, is going to map to Washington, WA, and that is gonna mess up our data. So there's checks and balances we can include, but I'm not gonna cover that in this tutorial. So you wanna be careful about how that operates in your data. Okay, I'm going to undo that. And for the time being, I don't need these columns here, so we're gonna hide them. And I am also gonna hide these state columns here that we don't need. We only need the clean version of the states. The next column we want to look at is the number of bedrooms. We're not gonna use this in our analysis, but we just wanna do some sanity checks and see that at a minimum we have 0 bedrooms, and the highest point we have 11 bedrooms, as we see here. So these values are within ranges that I would expect. And we also notice that we have a few blanks. For now, we're gonna leave those blanks as they are. Similarly, let's look at the bath and see if the minimum and maximum make sense. So at a minimum, we have 1 bathroom, which is what you would expect on a property. And at the maximum, we go to 7, and then we have 72. I would not expect 72 as a maximum, but let's dive deeper into this property. So we have 1 property with 72 baths. Let's click on it and try to understand what this is. Well, this is the listing that appears on Redfin. It's a property that is $1.5 million. It has no beds, and it has 72 bathrooms and 440 square feet. This does not make a lot of sense to me. This is when you're going to go and try to explore why this property is giving you these values, or you can, for the time being, delete it from your data set. And we're not gonna use this because this might mess our analysis up quite a bit. So I'm gonna delete that row, and I'm going to remove the filter. So we have it here. This is what is known as a sanity check, where you're testing the boundaries of what are the values that you would expect to see in your data set. The next column we're gonna analyze is this square footage. So we can see that our smallest value is 350 square feet, all the way up to a property that is about 6,000 square feet. We can see what a property of 6,000 square feet looks like and see if it makes sense. And we see a property like this, which we believe this could be that size. And it is located in New Orleans. Now, what I want to show also is that if we go into our blanks, we have quite a few properties that don't have square footage. And in effect, if you go to the Redfin link, the square footage appears blank. For now, we're gonna leave them as it is, but these are opportunities where we can go and try to find data that we wanna fit in here. For example, we can find the real values, or we can replace it with the most common value from all these properties, etc. The next column we're gonna analyze is this price column. So we can see our properties go from $65,000 all the way up to $8,250,000. And we have a few properties that are blanks. Let's look at those properties, and we can see that the prices are blank. Let's click on one of them. And what we learn is that it says that it was last sold for $90,000. But when we do a search down here, we see that the price here is empty. The 90,000 appears here, but there's sort of this new date that has it empty. So given that we can manually look at the price and we can see that it is $90,000, I'm going to suggest we manually replace this price with $90,000. Now, I'm going to do the same for the other 2 properties. Given that I have done this before, I'm just going to save us some time and say this property is $185,000. And the last one is $479,000. Finally, I'm going to select everything in this column, and I'm going to format this in a currency and remove the decimals, so it looks a little bit more elegant. The next column we're going to analyze is the year built. We can see that at the minimum we have the year 1830 all the way to the year 2023. So we don't have anything beyond that, which is the year of today, and this makes perfect sense to us. And we have a few blanks that I'm going to leave as they are. Now, one of the analysis we want to do is we want to know which of these properties are old and new being defined as built in the year 2000 or higher. So I'm going to add a new column on the right, and I'm going to add an if statement. And I'm going to say if the year built is greater or equal than the year 2000, then I want to replace this with new. Otherwise, I want this to be called old. Now let's copy this across the board and see what happens. Let's validate a few of these. These two are in the year 2000, so those are new. These are in the year before 2000, so those are old, and so on. And we can see that these go all the way to the bottom. So this makes sense. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a title for this column that is going to be old, new, and I'm going to add the clean so we know that it's a new column that we have created. The last thing we want to do is we're going to remove duplicates. So in some cases, we have duplicate rows. We can do this in two ways. One is we can select the whole data, go to data, data cleanup, and remove duplicates. And we're going to do it for all the columns. So everything that the whole row is exactly the same, we want to remove. When we do that, it says it found 11 duplicates, and in total we have 1,088 unique properties. This is great. However, we're going to have the same problem we described earlier with the trim function, that if I have suddenly this duplicate here, I'm going to copy this here, it still appears as duplicate, and unless we manually fix it, it will still be there. So I'm going to show an alternative solution just as a reference. And what we're going to do in this case is that we are going to create a new sheet that we see here. And I'm going to use the function unique, and I'm going to select the whole table that we have here. So all the way from B1 to N at the bottom. And we're going to run that. So now we have our table copied in this new sheet. And if we count, we see that we have 1,089 rows, which is less than what we had here in this case, where we have 1,100. And if we have the duplicate, suddenly a new duplicate comes to be. Now this is going to have 1,088 because the duplicate is not propagating here. Now, even though this is a preferred way, just for this tutorial, we're going to stick to what we have here, and we're just going to select our table, and we are going to just clean it up by removing the duplicates that we have in this case. So far, we have finished cleaning the data. Here on the left, we can see what were the data requirements that we had, and on the right, we can see the columns on the spreadsheet. So let's look at them one by one. One of the requirements was the sales price, which we were able to gather and format it appropriately. We filled in some missing values that we had manually. We also required the year of sale, so we formatted the data into an appropriate data type, and we extracted the specific year from the sales column. We also gathered the square footage. We left the blank square feet empty just because we couldn't get the data from the website. There's other ways of handling the missing values, but for the time being, we're going to leave these blank. We also had the year built and extracted a new column called Old New, where all the properties that were built on the year 2000 or after were tagged as new, and the rest was tagged as old. Finally, we cleaned up the state values, so we only had 5 states and 5 spellings, one for each state. You can also notice that we have some extra columns here, like the property type, number of bedrooms and bathrooms, etc., that we could eventually use, but we are not going to use them in this tutorial, but feel free to play with it as you build the dashboard. I'll see you on the next video where we start building the dashboard.